The prevailing narrative is a misdirection. The media fixates on kinetic threats, hypersonic missiles, carrier groups. This is a legacy framework for a symmetric conflict that is now economically obsolete. The real vector of systemic risk is not a launch-on-warning scenario. It is a launch into silence. The adversary's doctrine, refined in conflict zones like Ukraine, is not designed to win a kinetic war. It is a protocol of asymmetric escalation. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS identify two primary targets: the 1.3 million kilometers of subsea fiber optic cables that carry 97% of intercontinental data, and the constellation of low Earth orbit satellites that govern navigation and surveillance. The objective is not to defeat the Leviathan, but to blind it. By severing data flow and blinding its orbital eyes, an adversary disconnects its financial markets from global liquidity and its military from command and control. The kinetic cost is near zero. The result is a blind Leviathan, a conventionally superior power, suddenly paralyzed, insolvent, and unable to project force because it cannot see or transact. This protocol is not purely external. A recent letter from U.S. senators reveals the internal vector: access to critical infrastructure. The Department of Energy, which oversees 17 national laboratories, reports thousands of foreign nationals with access to sensitive sites. This is not simple espionage. It is the strategic placement of assets to exploit or disable the core technology that underpins national solvency, creating a zero-sum choice between systemic collapse or a final, desperate escalation. The motive for asymmetric escalation is not strength. It is the calculated protocol of a state facing a domestic solvency crisis. When a nation's internal liabilities, unpopular wars, unsustainable debt, social fracture exceed its capacity to pay, it does not declare bankruptcy. It exports the crisis. The math is irrefutable. Consider the trigger for the Ukraine conflict. CSIS analysis confirms that a prolonged, high-cost conventional war is a catastrophic domestic liability for Russia. It is a kinetic black hole for capital and social cohesion. The operation was never designed for a symmetric victory. It was a launch-on-warning response to a looming internal collapse. The war itself becomes the desperate, loss-leading instrument to restructure the global system in your favor. This weakness forces the pivot. A state that cannot afford symmetric, kinetic conflict must reroute its strategy through asymmetric vectors. The objective shifts from winning a battle to inflicting systemic, cascading costs on the adversary. This is not a failure of doctrine. It is its highest evolution under financial duress. As reports in the Small Wars Journal detail, drone warfare in Ukraine exemplifies this pivot. Low-cost assets are used to neutralize high-cost liabilities. This protocol targets two core liabilities: technology and finance. In the United States, 11 senators warned that thousands of Chinese nationals have access to 17 national laboratories, undermining the U.S. position in the AI race. This is not espionage. It is systemic, technological degradation. Simultaneously, financial markets become a weapon. As noted by finance magnates, actions like China curbs on supply can engineer a bright crisis, causing strategic assets like silver to surge, putting immense pressure on an adversary's liquidity. In a world where, as Shashi Tharoor states, great powers lost moral compass, the old rules are liabilities. The motive for asymmetry is survival. It is the only logical path for a weaker power to force a zero-sum choice upon a superior one. Accept systemic financial degradation or escalate to your final, most extreme kinetic option. The war is simply the catalyst for the solvency crisis. The foundational economic model of Western military dominance has been inverted. The math is irrefutable. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, calculate the kinetic cost exchange. A $5 million main battle tank, a primary vector of land power, is now a liability against a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a balanced fight. It is an economic execution. For every asset liquidated, the conventionally superior power bleeds millions in capital, while the asymmetric actor risks pocket change. This protocol is known as the democratization of violence. The monopoly on high-end lethality, once held exclusively by state-level actors with trillion-dollar budgets, has collapsed. It has been decentralized, commoditized, and placed into the hands of anyone with a credit card and an internet connection. This isn't a strategy to win a symmetric war. It's a blueprint to inflict a national solvency crisis by making self-defense fiscally unsustainable. The battlefield is no longer a defined geographical location. It is a distributed network of liabilities. The gray zone is not a distant desert. It is the commodity market that sets your prices, the university lab developing your technology, and the alliances you depend on for stability. These are now the primary theaters of operation. This protocol extends to the financial system itself. Reports from finance magnates detail how strategic supply curbs by state actors like China can trigger systemic shocks in critical commodities. The recent surge in silver is not a market fluctuation. It is a stress test. A low-cost administrative decision creates a high-cost solvency liability for industries and markets dependent on that resource. The most critical gray zone is inside the gates. A letter from 11 U.S. senators warns that thousands of nationals from adversarial states have access to the 17 national laboratories overseen by the Department of Energy. While the U.S. launches its Genesis mission to win the AI race, the very architecture of its open, collaborative research becomes the vector for its own technological subjugation. This is a systemic liability. Even diplomatic constructs are weaponized. As Shashi Tharoor warns, the China threat to India is not nullified by BRICS. The bloc itself becomes a staging ground for asymmetric leverage. This blueprint is scalable. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS assess that pockets of regional instability, whether in Southern Africa or even within Western nations, serve as proxy laboratories to test social solvency and measure the kinetic cost of intervention. These are not disparate crises. They are a coordinated protocol of asymmetric escalation. The mathematical objective is to degrade an adversary's financial and social solvency to a breakpoint. The final vector is a zero-sum choice. Accept systemic collapse or initiate a launch-on warning, kinetic response that guarantees mutually assured destruction. The trap is not the war, it's the choice itself. The launch-on warning doctrine is the terminal stage of strategic logic. It is not a choice, it is a protocol. The moment early warning systems detect an incoming nuclear barrage, a nation must launch its own arsenal before it is neutralized. The entire system is built on the mathematical premise that waiting for confirmation is functionally identical to surrender. The liability, however, is no longer a missile. It is a data packet. This protocol's only input is data. If that data is compromised, the protocol becomes a systemic liability. Analysts refer to this as the fog of digital war. In a conventional conflict, fog of war means incomplete intelligence. In the digital domain, it means your intelligence is actively lying to you. A cyber attack does not need to destroy a satellite. It only needs to blind it, spoof its signal, or corrupt its data feed. Suddenly, the commander does not know if his radar is blind because of a system failure or because it is the first move in a decapitation strike. This is not theoretical. According to a letter from 11 U.S. senators, in fiscal year 2024, approximately 3,200 Chinese nationals had access to the 17 national laboratories overseen by the Department of Energy. These are the same facilities researching nuclear technology. An adversary does not need to build a better missile. They only need to insert a single line of malicious code into the system that detects one. They weaponize the defender's own strength against them, creating a zero-sum choice between initiating global thermonuclear war on a false alarm or risking complete annihilation by waiting. This is the blueprint of asymmetric escalation. The doctrine of asymmetric escalation dictates that the first shot of the next conflict will not be kinetic. It will be a calibration test against the adversary's most critical, high-cost liability, systemic solvency. The blueprint, refined in theaters like Ukraine, leverages low-cost vectors for maximum economic degradation. The objective is not military victory, but to force a zero-sum choice between financial collapse and a launch-on-warning response. The vector for this calibration shot is already in place. U.S. senators recently flagged the systemic risk of approximately 3,200 foreign nationals inside the 17 national laboratories overseen by the Department of Energy. According to CSIS analysis, this access represents a critical vulnerability for an attribution-impossible cyber-physical event. Therefore, the forecast is a mathematical certainty. Within 12 months, expect a cascading, non-kinetic shutdown of a critical U.S. data or logistics hub, most likely a West Coast port or a Virginia data center corridor. It will be officially attributed to grid malfunction or unprecedented solar flare activity. The actual purpose will be to measure the precise kinetic cost, in dollars and days, of disrupting the American system